All right, everyone. You've heard the recording is getting started here today. So just so you know, you will be getting a copy of this recording after the class. Just want to welcome you all here for our fruit tree pruning class. My name is Denise Pinard, and I'm a volunteer with the UC Master Gardeners of Monterey and Santa Cruz counties. And we're really happy to see all of you here today. We have quite a large group. Before we get started, let's go ahead and get those little Zoom etiquette things out of the way here, even though most of us are pretty comfortable with those, so probably over these last couple of years. So just please make sure that your microphone is off, so you are muted. Also, we ask that you turn your video off if you could. It helps our program run a little more smoothly. We have better bandwidth, and it's also less distracting for the speaker and everyone else. We recommend that you choose speaker view up in your top right corner, just so you get the most from all the great slides that we have as we're going along. We'll use the chat window for any questions that you might have. You can put those in there anytime during the presentation, and we'll answer all of those at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical questions, just go ahead and message me specifically in the chat. So I'll get that to you. And as I said, we'll go ahead and send this presentation and a link to the video to your email after, probably within a day or two after the class. Oh, one other thing, if you'd like to use the live transcript feature, it's down at the bottom. It gives you basically a closed caption view as we're going along. So you can just click on that and have that little extra piece down at the bottom. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the UC Master Gardener program, we've been around for over 40 years now. We're all volunteers. We work in partnership with the Agriculture and Natural Resources Division at the University of California. We all receive comprehensive training, and our job is to provide outreach and research-based education on horticulture, pest management, and sustainable practices to home gardeners in our local communities. So now that you know a little bit about us, I'm going to turn it over to Trink to introduce our speaker for today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. Thank you very much, Denise. That was great beginning. And I too, Master Gardener for about 10 years now. And we love to put on these classes for the public. So that's one of my focuses in Master Gardener, is getting some of our great Master Gardeners like Diane, who have very specific and in-depth knowledge, to give these little classes for the public. So hope you enjoy them and join us for others in the future. Diane has been a Master Gardener for 6 years, but she is an incredible Master Gardener because she's been growing her entire life. She's a professional landscape contractor and a certified arborist. She really focuses on growing fruit trees, which is why she is so good at this kind of in-depth presentation. And right now, her little specialty is she's growing a half-acre dragon fruit that's just getting going. And I know from talking to her over the months, it's been quite a labor of love that at some point she might tell us more about. So I'm going to let her take it from here. And again, everyone, put some questions in the chat as we go along, or send a message to either me or Denise if you have any questions that you want answered in terms of the class itself and how it's running. So Diane, you want to start? Excuse me. Yeah, Diane, do you want to start us off here?
Okay, welcome everybody. Today, hopefully, you'll learn the basics of pruning. It's the reasons why you prune, how the fruit trees produce fruit, and what influences your pruning, the basics of pruning, the different kinds of cuts you can make and the results, and what tools you'll be needing. And it's hopefully get the basic understanding and what you need to look for. Okay, the reasons for pruning. First of all, you use it to control the size of the tree, so it's easier to care for and maintain in picking the fruit. You want to keep most of the fruit within arm's length, maybe have your tree 5 or 6 feet. so it's easy to access. And in home gardens, a lot of times you don't have very much room, so you want to keep the trees sort of small so you could have more different varieties in there. Pruning increases the strength and develops the limb structure, so you have more stout branches and not flimsy with the weight of the fruit that it'll be carrying. One of the most important things is you want to distribute the sunlight evenly throughout the tree, because without the sunlight, you're not going to get any fruit. That's what spurs your fruiting wood. And also the open air helps it be more disease and insect resistant. You regulate your fruit bearing by removing excess fruit wood, because if you think about it, if you went out now, you could see your limbs with all the blooms on them right now. If you think that theoretically each bloom, if it was fertilized, would make a fruit, you'd have that many fruits on just a small limb that wouldn't be able to bear the weight. So you want to do cutting back to help thin the fruit too. And then removing undesirable wood, broken, diseased, and crossing branches. And you usually do that first and take that out. Okay, how fruit trees produce fruit. You need to know where the flowers develop on the different fruit trees is important. The locations of buds and bud development will determine how that specific tree is pruned. And right now is a really good time because the trees are starting to push bloom now. So if you went out into your yard, you could see exactly where your fruit's going to be coming on with the buds and flowers. And even the wood that has the leaves, the leaf is just starting to turn. So you could identify all these different things by going out tomorrow. After the seminar, it'll probably be a little bit dark, but you could go tomorrow and you could identify on my peach tree, you could see where your fruit is. You could see how much fruit is. So you'll be able to apply this to what you do as you walk into your yard and go into your garden. Okay, the type of buds on the trees. Fruit buds contain flowers that, if pollinated, will carry fruit. Wood or growth buds develop into new shoot-carrying leaves, but no flowers. The fruit buds are usually fatter and more plump, and you'll see that when you go out tomorrow. And the ones that are the vegetative growth, the bud is more flat against the limb. So you need to know which are which, so you don't go cutting all your fruit wood out. Okay, this shows leaf buds. It's a pear tree, and you can see they're flat. They're sort of flat, and then they'll start coming out. And fruit buds, you can see how they're more plump, and these are on spurs, apples and pears, and they're stout and like stocky, and that will make your fruit. You could notice a difference. Where the fruit buds develop. Okay, it depends on the tree. The spur buds, there's a lateral bud where they develop at the base of a leaf along the shooter spur. The tip bearers, it produces the fruit buds on the tips of a shoot. Some apples do that, and figs do that, and partial tip bearers. That's more of an apple because it does both. Some on the tips and some on the previous year shoots, and some on spurs. Okay, spur-bearing trees. Spur-bearing trees, most apple and pears are spur-bearing trees, as well as the apples that have some, depending on the variety, are tip bearers. Spurs are shorter, less than 1/4 inch, and really thick. And they usually have little rings around them. They're stocky looking. They develop on the second year wood, and the spurs are fruit bud. Yeah, okay, it's the same thing. It's on the second year wood. Also cherries. Cherries are on spurs only. This shows you where the spurs are on the apple branch. You could see the short little stubby, and it has usually 3 or more. You could see the little buds on each side. Tip-bearing trees, relatively uncommon, produce very few spurs. Fruit buds are found at the tips of long shoots produced in the previous year's wood. Some apples are partial tip bearers. They'll produce on the tips and then on the shoots also. And then with the figs, they'll produce the first crop, which is called the Breba crop, on the tips of last year's growth. And right now you could see as they start to push growth, you'll see where the leaf bud starts to come out, and there'll be a little fig along the side. The second crop is on that current year's growth. So when you're pruning figs, the shorter limbs, you leave the tip and you leave that little point where the fig will grow, and you cut back pretty hard the longer shoots because you want to encourage a lot of current year's growth, because that's where your second crop, which is usually later around August, will come. So you need to leave some for the early crop, and then you still want to encourage enough for your later crop. So it's like a double crop you're getting. It's different than any other type of tree. That's the terminal bud on the apple, and it shows you the tip bearing of the apple tree. And then you could go back again, so you look how flat the leaf buds are as compared to the flower bud. So you could sort of compare how they look and know what to look for. Okay. Apple, pear, plum, cherry, and apricot also bear on spurs. Peach nectarine bears on last year's shoot growth. And then apricot again, because they also have the spurs and on 1-year-old growth. So they bear on both. Most of it is on spurs, 2/3 of it, but there's still some on last year's wood too. So you need to trim back last year's wood in order not to have an abundance of fruit where it's going to break your limbs. Apricots, you need to prune in the summertime because they get brown rot. And the reason for pruning in the summertime is you want the wound to heal over before the wintertime when it's wet and rainy and damp, because that's when the brown rot gets into the stem. As well as cherries, you do a summer pruning because they get gummosis and other diseases, and it's like a really hard wood tree, and you want that to heal over. Then the figs bear on current year's wood with the tips of last year's wood, like I said before. Quince and persimmon are on spurs coming off of, it's right, the spurs are actually like right before the new growth. You'll see this year's growth, and you'll see the little spur on the second year growth, and that's where they're located. And they're sort of long and a couple inches long and skinny. And if you have the persimmon trees, they don't bloom till later. So they're sort of hard to see too. You have to look for them. But you'll see where it leaves out. Then you'll be able to see the flowers are inconspicuous. It's not like a big showy flower. It's usually a greenish flower, the same color as the leaf almost. So you have to look hard on those. Okay, I have a picture of a pear tree, and it shows the vase shape of it. And that tree has 4 different grafts on it. So I have it open to the vase shape. And then the picture on the right shows the spurs where they're really stocky looking and a lot more meatier than the same year's growth. And that's where your fruit's going to come. There's a cherry tree, and I have the open vase with the cherry too. And you can see the spurs there. The cherries make spurs. You knock the spur off, there's no more spur. So you need to be really careful when you're harvesting and pick them by the stems and be gentle, because if you knock off the spur, you're knocking off the fruit that you're going to have for next year. So, okay. This one is the apricot tree, and the same thing. I have the open center, and you can see on there, you can see the spurs on the older growth. And then if you look on towards the end, that's last year's growth. There's some flowering there, and it's usually 1/3 of the flowers or blooms on the current year's, last year's growth, and then the rest would be on spurs. So you want to tip those back to thin them out also. Whereas the spurs, you'll thin the spurs out when after they fruit, because you could have sometimes 7, 8, 9 little apricots on each spur. So it's important to go through and thin them down to maybe 2 apricots on a spur. I know it's hard to do because you see it as your fruit, but it'll give you a bigger, nicer fruit, and you won't risk the chance of having the spur break off because it's just too many fruit. Okay, this is a persimmon. You could see, okay, on the persimmon, you could see where the spur is. You'll see last year's growth at the end, and then you'll see the spur right before that. So the spur's actually on the second year growth right before the last year's growth. So that's where it's located.
And Diane, is that a modified leader?
Yeah, I'm growing the persimmon as a modified leader.
Yep.
So that's what's going on with that. It's sort of modified. I could have like cut that right portion out, but persimmons don't really like a whole lot of pruning. I try to prune them, just to give them a little bit of shape, and they grow really slow. So I take out crossing branches or rubbing branches, but to do a heavy pruning on persimmon, I wouldn't take out a lot, not like I would on other trees.
Mm-hmm.
Minimal pruning.
Yep.
The nectarine, I have a vase shape on it. Nectarine and peach is similar. And then you could see the New Year's growth is sort of a reddish color. And that's how you could tell the 1-year-old growth. And that's where most of your bloom will be on a peach tree. That's why with a peach tree, it's important to cut those last year's growth back. So when you see the limb with all lined with beautiful flowers, you have to think all those blossoms are going to turn to fruit, and you don't want that. You want them cut back, and you want to cut back short enough that they'll be strong enough to support the weight of the fruit. Okay, this is a pluot, and the same thing. The pluot, it grows mostly on the spurs, but you do get some also on the 1-year growth. This pluot is a grafted variety. I have three different grafts on it. And if you look at the picture on the left-hand side, the right side of the tree is like super thick. It's like that one graft was really vigorous. So what I do with that, in the summertime, I have to prune it back to balance off the tree with the other 2 grafts. The summer pruning slows down the growth of that one variety. Otherwise, if it was left, that one variety would suck up all the energy of the tree, and those other 2 grafts on the side you could see are pretty small. They would end up dying because a caliper alone, just on the trunk on that side, you could see it's almost double what the other ones are. And I cut that back hard every summer, and I try to keep it under control. But a lot of times with grafts, that's something you have to deal with. And I know that the nurseries sell a lot of grafted trees, and for someone to buy a multi-fruited tree is a really good idea, because you could have 3 different varieties, and some giving fruit from early summer all the way to late summer. So you're not overloaded with fruit all at one time. You could enjoy it throughout the summer instead of having to gorge on it and get tired of eating it because you have so much just by having one variety. And then it had the spurs on there, but that's okay. That just shows you the spurs. That's no big deal. Okay, the type of pruning cuts. There's a heading cut that, oh, I think the next one goes into depth, right? There's a heading cut, there's a reduction cut, and there's a removal cut. And then I think the next slide goes into more depth. Okay. The removal cut removes the branch from the trunk or parent branch just outside the collar. When you do a removal cut, you remove the limb. It's gone. It's not going to come back. Where you want to cut it is right outside the collar. It's if you look by the trunk where the limb comes out, it'll be like a ring. And in that ring are parenchyma cells. Those are the cells that will promote healing over of the wound. So when you cut and you leave that collar, the wound will heal quickly. If you cut too far close, it's a flush cut, and then you end up having a tree that's going to take a long time to heal because those cells are gone, and you'll have more chances of insects and disease entering. And if you leave the stub's going to rot back into the main trunk of the tree because the branches grow out of the main trunk all the way into they don't hang on the side. They're part of the main trunk of the tree. So it'll rot back in sort of like a cavity. And then let's see, the reduction cut, you make that cut to another limb. So it removes the bottom part and the remaining limb takes off. A heading cut, when you make that, it strengthens the part of the limb that you leave. And that heading cut will send shoots out on either side of that cut. So you should cut back to a bud depending on which way you want that limb to grow out. Okay, when to prune. Winter pruning, it's easiest to prune when you have no leaves. Winter pruning invigorates growth and remaining buds. Apricot, and except for the apricot and cherry, which I mentioned before, they need to be pruned in the summertime so they could heal over because of diseases that they'll get during the winter time. Summer pruning, you use it to slow down the vigorous trees. So if you have, even if you have a tree that's next to another tree and too close and shading it, you could cut that other tree back and leave more of an area so your tree next to it could get more sunlight. That you would do in the summertime to try to slow it down. Otherwise, the tree will keep growing and create shade if you have quite a few trees. Okay, it slows down fruit development and risks sunburn. So you have to be careful about that. And usually if you're doing summer pruning, you're not doing a bunch of heavy pruning and really opening it up. You're just cutting back and just trying to slow down and control the growth, not like you would do a winter prune. You're just clipping back a little bit. Okay, this is the shaping of the trees. There's a central modified leader, and then there's the open vase. And what they do is they let sunlight in. The open vase lets sunlight into the middle, and the modified leader lets the sunlight in through the sides, because you'll notice the bottom is longer and then the top is shorter, so it lets sunlight hit all the limbs. That's a picture of a vase shape.
And also this is the one, Diane, where when they receive this, they can click on this picture and you will get a short, about 5-minute video by Orrin Martin, who is one of our wonderful instructors up at UCSC. And so he has done this great video on shaping trees, either to vase or modified. And rather than going into it, we thought we would just provide you these videos. Not all of you will be dealing with brand new trees, but if you are, these are good ones to watch before you do that. So this one tells you about the vase and this one tells you about the modified. So again, as it says down here, click on the slide for a link.
Okay, Pruning young trees. Young trees you prune fairly heavy to encourage growth for the first 3 years. You don't want to keep fruit necessarily on the tree, even though something like peaches, the second year you may have some on there. You want the energy of the tree to go to giving you the structure instead of the fruit. But I've let peaches on there because I didn't want to wait. So I'm guilty. Shouldn't do it, but I did. I only left one. But the first year for sure, if you have any fruit on there the first year, make sure you remove it. The second year it's iffy, but you should take it off. You want to leave most of the small horizontal branches because the horizontal branches are the ones that are going to make fruit, whereas the upright branches are the ones that are more vegetative and they're going to make your limbs. So the harder you cut back, the more the branches grow. So when you cut the branches back, cut them back by about 50% and you'll get more growth. And if anybody's ever seen when they pull out a mulberry tree and you see them cut them all down to the nubs, that's cutting really, that's not the way to, I'm not promoting doing that, but I just giving you an example. They cut it all the way back and the next year that tree is just as huge as it was before they did it. So that's sort of an example of cutting back really hard and the tree pushes out growth really heavy. Pruning basics. The basic thing you would do when you would walk up to your tree, you'd look at it, first take out the diseased and broken branches, look at the bottom, suckers or water sprouts, remove those. Any cross branches you want to take out. And this one here is a central leader tree. So you wouldn't be really cleaning out the middle of so much. You would be taking more of these lateral branches out that are going to take up the light. So in a tree that's vase shaped, then you would be removing a lot of the limbs that are trying to go into the center. And when you make your cuts, if you look on your limb, the way the bud points off the limb is a direction that your limb is going to grow. So if you think of when you make your cuts, which way the bud points is which way your limb's going to grow. If you're doing your vase shape, you want your limbs to point out and you want them to point away from each other. And that's really important to pay attention when you're making your cuts because you want to make it open. So we'll go around the tree and all the little outside buds, those are the ones you'll be clipping out at a 45-degree angle. Okay, this talks about the branch angles. Upright branches are vegetative and vigorous, and then the horizontal branches are the more fruitful branches. You want a combination of the two for fruiting now and future years. Branches bent to 45 to 60 degrees achieve this balance. So you could go to the next one. The next one shows the spacing and stuff. So when you're training the tree, if you're planting a new tree, a lot of times the scaffolding is really tight. You usually don't go from the nursery and get this perfect tree that's nice and open. You usually have to work with the tree to get the shape. And spacers work really well to separate the branches. I've used before just off wood that I pruned off the tree. I put part of a fork and then tied the other part on there and it works well. On this picture, they showed tying them down with twine, but to me, it seems like it's the twine, it gets sort of rough. It may end up scarring the plant. So probably a better idea if you're doing the tying down would be like that green tape that Miracle-Gro makes it, I think, would probably work. And also what I've seen is getting weights. Fishing weights would probably work, but I've seen people get like little cups and put concrete and put a little loop with metal, and then you tie it to the tree, and then you tie it so it could hang down to try to get that flat growth so it turns into fruiting wood. Okay, where to cut? Okay, heading cuts encourage sprouting. Topping a vertical branch encourages vegetative growth. Tipping horizontal branches renews fruiting wood. And then removal and reduction cuts. Removing vertical branches opens up a tree to more light. That's when you're taking out a lot of vertical branches out of the middle. Reducing horizontal branches may remove fruit, but may prevent a branch from breaking from heavy fruit. A horizontal branch is removing. Sometimes you'll have a branch with a lot of horizontal branches on it. So you'd want to cut some back so it's not overly bearing weight on the one limb. And I think there's more on another one too after this, right?
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah. Let's do the sunlight. Okay. Increase sunlight to the tree. That's the main thing of pruning, is to get sunlight into the tree. And that's the main reason for your training like a vase shape, or your training like the lateral. So what was that? Okay, you're pruning by pruning the middle, you're exposing the lower branches to sunlight. The sunlight is what makes the branches fruitful and gives you your fruiting buds. If it was shaded, it would stop fruiting. And if your tree was all thick and all full of branches inside, you would get no fruit at all inside. You may get some on the top where it could get the sun, and that would probably be the only places you'd be getting fruit. So if you do have that going on right now with your tree, you'll probably need to make a few big cuts to clean it out. And I wouldn't take out more than like 1/3 of the wood, because you don't want to, shock the tree. But make some big cuts and clean out the wood, and then maybe in the summertime, take some more out. But it will be probably a process that'll take you 3 or 4 years to do, because you definitely, if you never pruned your tree before after seeing this, don't go in there and strip everything out of the middle, because the tree will go into shock. Then it'll just start pushing growth all over because you pruned it really heavy. So renewal is a slow process, not something that you go out there and just jump into. Okay, here's the pictures of the cuts. That's the clean cut where you're leaving the collar. Stub cut, that's you could notice where the collar is and the stub sticking out like maybe about a 1/2 inch where that leaf is. That's gonna rot back into your main trunk. The flush cut, that hard piece there dies, and then it has a huge if you look at that surface area, it's probably 5 times as big as the surface area if you just made a regular clean cut. So you have that much more the tree has to put energy to heal over. Now this cut ripped because usually if the limb is a heavy limb, you can make 3 cuts. You can make one, cut it off, and then make undercuts. Or I usually just hold it with my hand and I saw through it so it doesn't rip. But if it's too big to do that, make sure you make an undercut away from the collar so it doesn't tear. Otherwise, you're going to tear the collar and sometimes all the way down into your branch. And then it makes diseases easier to get into the tree. These are your angles. You can see where the bud is. You want to go a 45-degree angle, and that sheets off the rain. And where the bud is the direction your limb is going to go. Too angular, it dies back more. This other one, they cut right above the bud, so it may damage the bud. And then the other one, you got it above the bud and it ends up dying back. So it ends up being a stub because this new bud will grow out, and that stub, because there's nothing else there, it'll die back to the growing point, which was that bud. So make sure it's a 45-degree cut. You could even practice after you do pruning, practice on the wood to get the 45-degree cut. The essential tools, there's a hand pruner, which is a bypass pruner, and that one looks like a Felco. That's a really good pruner. Lopping shears for trees, usually 30 to 36 inches, so you could get good leverage on them. Pruning saw, if the limb's too big for the lopper to cut it without you resting the lopper against your shoulder and pulling with two hands, that sometimes crushes the limb. If you have a nice sharp pruning saw and get a good quality one, saws work really easy. You could almost use a saw just as quickly as using a lopper. And then always have a tool sharpener and sharpen your tools before you start. And one more thing, going between trees, or if you're doing diseased trees like apricots that maybe have brown rot, or apple trees that get fire blight, between trees, spray with a disinfectant. You could use like spray Lysol. What I usually get is 90% alcohol, propyl alcohol, and I just put a sprayer on top so it still has a label, and I use that. Some people mix Clorox and water, but the Clorox and water I found tends to rust your tools more, whereas alcohol doesn't. But make sure to sterilize in between trees also, so you don't spread disease. And then this shows bypass or anvil pruners and reasons to use them. I usually just use the bypass pruners because the anvil pruners to me seem to crush, but I know some people that favor anvil pruners, so I guess it's up to your choice, but I like the bypass pruners better myself, and it seems like it's easier for me to cut with them. And then ladders, make sure you have an orchard ladder, which is a tripod ladder, because the folding ladders and things like that, they don't work too good on the soil, especially gopher holes and things like that. And even with the orchard ladders, when you place them in with the leg, put the leg out and get on the ladder and jump on the ladder on the steps before, to make sure there's no holes or anything that as you climb up, it's going to go into, and then it's too late because you're already up on the ladder. But make sure that the ladder is set well before you climb it. And usually by jumping on the bottom step a couple times and pushing on it, because the gophers have been terrible. So I fight with them in my yard, so I'm always careful for that. I know I'm not the only one.
So true.
That's it.
Okay, so let's look at some of the questions. There have been quite a few. So Denise, do you want to read some of the questions that we had?
Absolutely. All right. Some of them I think probably got answered as we went along, but I'm going to go ahead and throw them out there, and you can do a little clarification to make sure everybody's covered on things. So first we had one from Janet wondering specifically about the Santa Rosa plum, where the fruit is produced. If it's, I believe it was on spurs, but you're the expert, so is that true?
Santa Rosa has some on spurs and some on last year's wood. It has both.
A little of everything, huh? All right. Okay.
Both.
All
right. If you go out and look at your tree, you'll see there's blooms on it now, and there'll be some blooms on last year's growth.
All right. Okay. So let's see. Jan noticed that on the main trunks on some of the trees that you have pruned in your yard were pretty severely cut back. For what trees do you recommend that?
Let's go back and see which ones are cut back a lot.
Yeah. Maybe.
I think maybe it's the fact that they're vase shaped.
If it's a cherry tree, the cherry tree only is growing on spurs, and that tree is probably, they're small trees. I think that tree was like 4 years old because I had another tree in there and I didn't like it and I dug it out and I put that in. So that's a Lapin cherry, and it cherries grow really slow. And I've done hardly any cutting on that at all. The cherry, all I did was clean out the middle a little bit and that was it.
Well, that one is vase shaped as well, isn't it, Diane?
Yeah, it's vase shaped, but cherries there's not a lot of growth on cherries.
Yeah, right. And, I think the question.
This is like a 4-graft pear tree. So there's 4, each limb is a different variety. So what I have to do is sort of open it up to each variety so I can't actually get a vase, and I don't want a lot of other limbs growing into the other grafts. So that's the reason why this is opened up as it is. And I had spacers on that one at one time.
Yep, great.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So Lori, oh, go ahead. Lori has a food.
Pruned. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. So Lori has a Fuyu persimmon that she put in last year that she doesn't want to get too big. Can it be kept to 7 feet high or so? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, as it grows, just cut it back and just leave it to the height you want as it's growing. Mine's pretty small. I think that persimmon is that's probably 8 or 9 years old. They grow really slow. So it's going to take a long time for it to get big, but you could the top limbs, just cut them back to outside facing buds, but you can keep them small. As it grows, just keep them small.
Especially since they grow so slowly, huh? Yeah.
They grow really slow. Just keep it small as it grows. Don't let it get out of hand. Every year, take it back down to the size you want it. And you won't be taking down a whole lot. Just don't let it get big and then try to cut it down.
Great.
Got it. Stay on top of it a little bit, huh?
Stay on top of it.
There are quite a few questions about citrus, just in general. So you have some.
Citrus is a whole different thing. So
okay.
Probably not related to dormant pruning.
Okay. All right. Well, that probably takes care of a few of the, the questions there.
A whole nother thing. So it's a whole complete different, it's going to take a long time to go through all the citrus stuff. That's probably better not to do. Probably better to do something about citrus and trees like that.
Okay. So maybe we can have a separate class. to do that.
It's way different from deciduous.
Some of the things are similar though, in terms of, for example, one of these questions are, do you remove, do you do the removal cut outside the collar, or do you cut flush to the limb? Am I right, Diane, that's a basic
removal cuts outside the collar. You never cut flush to the limb. You always identify where the collar is and you cut outside of the collar.
Right. And so that's true for any kind of tree.
Anything, even ornamental trees, because that's the way the trees grow.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. A couple of questions about suckers, I believe. One of them is, do you pull them or cut them?
I usually cut them. I cut them as close down as I can because the suckers are coming off of the rootstock.
Right. Okay.
Coming below the graft. So I usually cut them out. Sometimes suckers will even grow like just from the roots out of the dirt too. Those you might be able to pull them out, but for me, it's just easier to cut them.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Can I ask a question here? Diane, do you have any recommendations, like if you see them coming down, digging down and cutting it below the ground, could that potentially cause any diseases because of it being in the ground, under the ground?
I never even thought about that.
Yeah, and I think because of that.
If I did that, I'd cut it.
Yeah.
I'd make sure I cut it and not pulled it and ripped it, because I know I've had to prune roots before, and I know it's really important when you're, like, I've gone in after people have trenched and tore the roots up, and I've gone in and cleaned up the roots and made clean cuts, and that supposedly helps them heal better. You don't want to leave any like torn kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I would think if you dug down and you made a clean cut, that would be okay. And then put the dirt back on top, because if the sunlight hit, a lot of times the suckers come out far if the sunlight gets through to where the surface roots are and then sends up the suckers. Mm-hmm. It's enough sunlight down to activate the bud.
Good, thank you.
All right. All right. The question about weighing down the branches, is that successful for any variety, or certain trees that you can do that with?
Now I use them a lot on apples, because apples have tendency to have a lot of upright branches, but you could use them on any variety. It would work to open up the tree more.
Good.
All right. Okay. Let's see. Not 100% sure what direction we're going with this question, but it was, can gophers prevent fruiting from apple or peach trees? I don't know if that...
Gophers could end up killing the tree. So I guess if you had enough gophers and they were eating the roots, it would take away the vigor of the tree, and it could affect how your fruit is growing, because the tree wouldn't be that strong.
Yeah.
Right.
You need to trap them. Either trap them, or when you put your new trees in, put them in gopher baskets. Because I would say they would indirectly do that, because they're making the tree weaker. But I don't think there's actually a link between gophers and the trees not fruiting.
Right. Okay. All right. Let's see. This one's kind of it's a just curious question. Can you graft European pear with Asian pear?
Yes.
Anyone, do you know?
You can graft European pear. You could graft pears on pears. Asian pear, European pear. And you would be doing it as soon as it's usually as soon as the sap starts flowing, but with this hot spell we have, the sap's already flowing. So I had some trees I wanted to graft, and I'm sort of thinking, should I do it now? Because they're already pushing growth, where normally they wouldn't be pushing growth like that, and you would be waiting probably until March, sometime in late March. But as soon as they're pushing growth, you could graft. Just make sure that you line up the cambium layers.
Grafting
right.
Grafting. Yeah.
It's a whole other one, huh?
Yeah.
All right.
Another one. You could graft that. You could graft peaches, nectarines. You could graft apricots on plums. Prunish you could graft. And then the pomes you could graft. Mm-hmm. Pears you could graft different varieties. Apples you could graft different varieties.
All right. Okay. Well, just kind of related to our sort of early spring here, so to speak, is it too late to prune if there are flowers on the tree?
I'd prune anyway. It's the flowers are on it, but I think you'll benefit more by the pruning than not. And especially because this year it's sort of unusual. It should be flowering now, but it is. But I would prune anyway. Maybe not as hard, but you need to let light in, and by pruning, you're thinning out so you have less fruit. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of thinning to do. So I think the tree would benefit more by pruning with flowers than not pruning at all.
All right. Okay, a couple of questions about older trees. So any advice for tackling a long neglected larger tree?
What you want to do, I touched on it a little bit. You want to take out probably no more than 1/3 and maybe take 3 big cuts. Like if the middle is all congested and crowded, don't make small cuts, make big cuts where you could take a lot of wood out at one time, but try not to take out 1/3 of your total tree. And then see how it goes from there, because you don't want to overstimulate it. And this summer, I'd also do some summer pruning to slow down the growth. But it'll probably maybe take 3 years to get it to where you want it to get. But don't do it all at once. Do a little bit at a time, and do big wood cuts. Don't do a bunch of little small cutting. Just take big cuts out.
I think
right.
Some of the principles we've talked about here are important to remember as you do that you want to get some sun into the tree. You know, kind of all depends too on whether it's vase shaped or modified leader, and really shaping the tree to what that shape.
And then the tree may be 15 feet high. Yep. So you want to get it low. So you'd want to go in there and you want to start taking it down. Because you could get a big, out of control, tall tree. You could work on getting it small again to where it's manageable.
Yeah, it's a good cautionary comment, though, to do it slowly, plan it over slowly 4 years. Yeah.
All right. Relating, I believe, to the larger and older trees, would you start from the bottom or start from the top down as far as choosing your third?
Older trees, you want to keep the growth on the bottom, because that's where you want to have your fruit that you pick. So you want to take the top down. You want to make it smaller.
Yeah.
You don't want to strip it up.
Although you do want to do some of these no-brainer cuts that we're looking at right here, right, Diane? Mm-hmm.
You want to open it up, and you could reduce the height too. You could reduce the height of the older trees. So you want to take the height of the top and you want to take it down. And then after you start getting it down, then the stuff down below will start getting sunlight, and you could start getting fruit again down below.
Good point.
All right. Okay, let's see. So let's see. In an orchard with mature apple and pear trees, many of them have grown huge number of water sprouts at the top. Any thoughts about managing those?
With the water sprouts on the top, maybe try thinning them out and only leaving one and then heading it back. Or you could cut into the 2-year-old wood, and that'll remove them. It's hard when people start doing that.
Diane, can you explain what he means by water sprouts at the top? I mean, generally, like the picture we're looking at, the water sprouts are down below.
He's talking about water sprouts. It could be called witch's broom. It's when you make the cuts at the top and you get all the growth going.
I think let me see.
You could take it back to one and then try to manage it for there, depending on how tall the trees are. I'd thin them out maybe and leave it to one, so you're not dealing with big problem.
Looking, there we go. This.
It's sort of like a heading cut.
Yeah.
See that heading cut? It's sort of like that.
Yeah.
Where it grew like a mass. But I'd thin it down to one and maybe be able to slow down the other stuff and direct only into one limb.
All right. Let's see. So a concern about cutting new wood that would eventually turn into fruiting wood. Are all vertical stems vegetative?
Yeah, the vertical stems always push out vegetative growth. The horizontal stems are the ones that do fruit. Even if you have like a cherry, you'll have the limb will be horizontal, but the spur will be lateral off the side. It'll be horizontal where the limb will be vertical. So the fruiting wood's off the vertical limbs.
All right. Let's see. So a few more of those neglected and overgrown trees coming along here to need work here. So specifically a Sierra plum. It's kind of the, let's see. Thoughts about pruning an overgrown, neglected, never pruned Sierra plum.
I'd try to maybe take 3 major cuts out of the middle to open it up to sunlight.
All right, as a start there, huh?
As a start, right. Try to make 3 major cuts. What you want to do is open up the center first. So just make some big wood cuts with your saw and open up the sunlight and just start by that first. And you're probably going to have to take down the height too, but I think it's more important to open it up first. Try opening it up first, and then maybe next year, take the height down. The plums go crazy.
All right.
And do some summer pruning too to try to slow it down. You could prune in the summer and get away with it also on the plum. Okay. It's hard to go in. It's like, maybe if you step back and look at your tree and get tape or a ribbon and figure out which branches you want to end up with when you're done. That might be a better way to do it. So if you want to like an open vase, pick 4 or 5 things, put a ribbon around it, and that's going to be what you're going to have when you're done. Then you could take a little bit out at a time, and you could still visualize where you're going to end up. But you're going to have to do it over probably a period of 2 or 3 years. But you'll have your original idea down, and it may be easier to see that way. Because that's the way I usually think when I prune. It's like I look at the tree and I picture how it's going to look when I'm done. So all I'm really doing when I'm pruning, I'm just taking out what doesn't belong there. So if you tied stuff off and did that, I think that would really help.
Good thing. All right. When you're doing those larger cuts, is it important to treat the cut on the tree, or is it safe to leave it? No?
You want the cut just to dry out on its own. So you don't want to put the tar and all that other stuff. It keeps the moisture in. So that's not, I went to college at Fresno State in the late 70s, and they were doing the experimenting with using that. That's when they used to use the tar all the time and that black magic. And they found out it did more harm than good because it kept disease in. It's sort of like when you cut your finger and you keep a Band-Aid on it, it doesn't heal, it keeps sort of soggy. And when you let the air get to it, it actually could dry up and heal. It's the same thing, that the pruning coatings really aren't a good idea. If you're doing grafting to seal the moisture out, maybe, but you don't want to be treating the wounds on the tree. Better to dry out.
Right. All right. Let's see. I don't think we covered pomegranates. Is that something that fits into this class today? Is it better to keep it or try to get it into being a tree, or to keep it more as a shrub for fruit production?
It's more shrubby. The pomegranate's different.
All right.
Doesn't really.
All right. So on the weighing down of things, can you weigh down the first year vertical growth or wait until second or third year to weight those down?
You could weight down first year's growth. It's like, especially like with apples and pears and stuff like that, the growth, you'll have a small tree and it'll have all the growth will be going upright. So you want to try to pull them down either by spacers or by weights.
Right.
Just make your weights in comparison to the caliper of the limb. You don't want a big old heavy weight on the limb that's really small. So you want it to bend a little bit, not be like you've got a big fish on the line.
All right. Okay, so someone, it looks like they have a pear tree that looks like one of your trees, the one that has the really strong variety on it. It's a 4-in-1 pear. And they have someone in to help them a couple times a year. But what you do on yours is to do some summer.
I do summer pruning. That was on the plum. I do summer pruning on the plum, on the pluot,
right?
Yeah, it's on the pluot. It's on the graft that's more vigorous. I do summer pruning to keep it in check. Otherwise, it'll like grow 3 times as much as those other limbs, and those other ones won't do anything. So the summer pruning works really good. And it's when it starts pruning and starts getting out of control, just start cutting it back and try to balance it off. It'll slow it down. You don't want to let it get all grown and out of control and wait till the wintertime. By then it's too late.
Right. All right, let's see. I'm going to just read this one, and I'm not sure if it makes sense. I'm having a little trouble with that. People say that the best pruning for a tree is that you don't find pruning events happen. Does that apply for dormant pruning for fruit trees? I'm not sure if that.
But you don't see events happen. I don't know if I understand.
Maybe George, you could add a little clarification. I'm not sure if we're following that.
Unmute yourself, George, if you want.
Let's see. Yeah. All right, well, we'll see if we get some more on it. Oh, wait, meaning just don't prune too harsh.
Yeah, the more you prune off, the more the tree grows. So it's when the tree's young, you want it to grow a lot. As the tree gets older, you want to prune less so you're not stimulating a lot of growth. Right. That's correct. You don't want to take lots and lots and lots of wood out. You want to just prune a little bit out as an older tree. As a younger tree, you want to stimulate a lot. As an older tree, you want to sort of keep it going as it is.
All right. So in a 5-in-1 apple tree, some of the branches are about a foot taller than others. The taller branches are maybe about 5 feet total height. The lower branches are maybe 3.5. Should they take the taller branches back in line with the shorter ones? And if so, in summer or winter?
I take them back. I take the grafts back to the same size because you're growing it as a vase shape, usually if it's 5-in-1. So I take them back to the same size and cut them back to the buds pointing out and away from the other grafts.
All right.
If you leave them longer, then sometimes those grafts will outgrow the smaller grafts and you'll end up losing them. Try to keep the same amount of wood on all 5 of the grafts.
All right. And is that winter pruning then?
Winter pruning.
Okay.
pruning. So you'd be doing it now.
Okay. Let's see. If you're going to be spraying dormant oil or oil on it, do you do that after the pruning?
It depends, because like if you're putting dormant oil, it depends when you're pruning. It doesn't make, I don't think it makes a difference, because if you're putting dormant oil, I usually put it like around November, December, because the dormant oil smothers insect eggs and things like that. You'd be using it on plums.
Yeah,
copper you would be using on peaches and apricots, and apricots already would have been pruned in the summertime, and you'd be using it at bud swell on the apricot. So I don't think it makes a difference. What makes a difference is like with the copper, maybe getting an application once before it rains and after it rains to stop the curly leaf. And then the dormant oil, you're just smothering insect eggs, so it isn't going to make a difference.
I think that's a great explanation, Diane. So it really depends on the tree and also what you're spraying for. Often we do the sprays a little earlier to have them be effective over the winter and into the spring, and then you do your cutting a little later as the tree is starting to plump up those buds. So
it depends.
Yeah. Okay, they're great. Do we have any final questions there, Denise?
Let's see. Yes, a couple more. One of them, what height would you recommend for the lowest scaffold in both vase and central leader fruit trees?
Okay. In my trees, I'm usually at like about 3 feet on my vase trees. It's like, if you have them growing in your yard, they could be low. If you're in an orchard, you'd have them high because tractors would have to go under them. And the modified central leader, I think those are usually shorter. I think the first limbs are usually shorter down than the vase shaped limbs. You want to keep them as low as you can, so you can pick them easy. But I wouldn't have them so low that they would be on the ground. My trunks are usually, I'd say 3 feet, maybe 4 feet, no higher than 4 feet, maybe 3 feet. I have to think. I'm looking at my trees in my mind. Because I get them and I just do them. I never thought about it. I try to keep them as low as possible, though. And there's some trees I know you can get from the nursery. They're headed to have low fruit.
Yeah.
I forgot what they were called. I think there's some plums, and they're headed in the nursery, so the fruit is all really low.
All right. So you mentioned some differences with fig trees. When do you prune them?
Figs you prune in the wintertime. And how you prune figs, when you look at your tree, you'll have all these long branches, and they'll have all the little tips on them where the buds are. What you want to do, the shorter limbs, you want to leave. That'll be your breva crop. The longer limbs, I'd cut back by at least half, because those are you want to force growth for your crop that will come in August, because that brand new wood is a fruiting wood. So you want to have some of the first crop, because they're usually nice big figs, but you want to have a lot for your second crop, because that's usually the big crop. But you do that in the wintertime. You do that now.
Right. All right.
Don't cut every limb back. Leave some of the limbs so you have the figs on the tips.
All right, Trink, I think I have seen most of the questions. Maybe I've missed some if you have some that you've seen.
I think you've gotten them all too. I think anyway, I think we've kind of run out of a little time, and as we can recommend to you some things that could answer more of your questions. One is this Home Orchard book that is actually a UC Agriculture and Natural Resources book that all of us Master Gardeners get, and it's really has rich information in it. So for those of you with quite a few trees and are going to be doing a lot of pruning, I highly recommend this book to you, specifically developed for the backyard grower. And then, as I mentioned, Orrin Martin from UCSC also has a really great book, and I'd recommend that one too to a number of people, as well as his recordings on YouTube, any that you can find there. He does a great job, including for those of you that are trying to renovate some older trees. He does provide some great information about that. So it's been great questions, everyone. We really have learned a lot from this, and I definitely will be putting citrus pruning onto our future class list for those of you interested in that. Probably just growing citrus altogether, including how to prune them. We do have we always are improving our classes. So I'm going to ask Denise to take this survey link and put it in the chat. And I hope that you all will go to it and give us some feedback on how we did with this, and give us some recommendations also for classes that you would like to see in the future. You'll also in 6 to 8 weeks receive an email from the California Master Gardener Organization at the statewide level, because they like to do a little survey to find out whether you're using what you have learned from us. It certainly helps us with fundraising. So pay attention to that and answer that as well. And watch our website, our Master Gardener website, for upcoming classes. There are a couple we'll be doing in March, one about starting your spring vegetables and another about controlling those pesky spring pests, including gophers we'll be talking about as well, and some of the insects that particularly are annoying during the spring. So with that, and we'll end with, remember that we do have a really great Master Gardener hotline. So some of the questions that maybe didn't get answered today, feel free to go to our website and submit a question to the hotline, and you'll get an answer within a few days. Send them pictures of your specific trees, and that should help as well. So thank you all very much for coming. Denise, Diane, any final questions or comments you have?
I think we're good.
Great.
Thanks, Diane.
Yes, thank you, Diane. Terrific, terrific. And I know there's some Master Gardeners on this, listening in on this. So please particularly let us know, and we'll be talking to more of you soon. And see you in future classes. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.